Today's story is a folk tale from Bihar with a surprising amount in common with European folk tales, including Hansel and Gretel and Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Except in today's story, there are seven Goldilocks and seven bears and aliens and ghosts. Welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you fascinating stories of the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. This folktale from Bihar is going to sound like a mashup of a number of fairy tales from Europe. Let's jump straight in. Several centuries ago, there was a family that lived in a village. The family members included a father, a mother, and their 7 daughters. The parents were called Bhuka and Bhuki. Before you marvel at the strangeness of two people with similar names getting married, let me clarify that I'm simply following the tradition of this show and naming the characters based on the role they play. Bhuka and Bhuki are simply the gender-specific Hindi words that mean a hungry person. As for the children, I'll name them Pehli, Dusri, Tisri, Chauthi, Panchvi, Chhati, and Satvi. Those are the Hindi words counting from first to 7th. This family had no stable income, and they'd often go hungry. Their hut could scarcely shield them from the monsoon rains, let alone from the judgmental gaze of the other villagers. Bhuka was the breadwinner of the family, if you can call him that, because he wasn't bringing home any bread in baked form. At best, he'd bring home some of the ingredients of bread. Sometimes a little wheat, sometimes just water. You see, Bhuka was a scholar. And if you were a scholar in medieval India, it might be a lucrative profession, but only if you got to tutor the children of a king. Otherwise, you were out on your own, begging in the street and hoping for handouts from anyone you managed to impress with your knowledge of Sanskrit. Their worsening conditions may have dampened the family's spirits, but it did little to change the girls' appetite. Between the 7 of them, their gluttony could put a herd of starving pigs to shame. At least, that was Bhuka and Bhuki's assessment as they went to bed, again on an empty stomach. The next night, with their daughters snoring in the background, Bhuka secretly beckoned his wife over. He took out a wrapper from the secret pocket in his dhoti, and he carefully unfolded it. "Look what I have It's a peanut. Bhuki could have cried tears of joy as she savored the taste of her half of the peanut. She would remember this feast for a long time. And then Bhuka threw a wrench in the works with a new idea. I really want to eat porridge, he said. Bhuki did not take it well. Porridge? Seriously? She then softened her tone and her voice to avoid waking their daughters. By porridge, do you mean the dish Goldilocks had at the Three Bears' house? No, I meant kheer, her husband replied. I meant that sweet dish made from slow-cooked rice, milk and sugar. I only use the word porridge in case any of the listeners on the show hadn't heard about kheer before. Which was a reasonable explanation, considering this podcast is heard in almost every country in the world. Bhuki pointed out the practical difficulties. To make kheer, we need rice, milk, and sugar. She said that the street he had been working on didn't have those types of ingredients. That's true, Bhuka said. But something has happened. You remember Pyasa? He works in that rich neighborhood. It so happens that he has to go on a business trip. There is this beggars' convention in the city where they are doing a workshop on refining begging practices for the 15th century. Yes, I know, she said. I saw the posters and heard the taglines everywhere. Incantations to open hearts and purses. Exactly, Bhuka said. So while he's away, he's asked me to cover his daily route. We can't afford for the homeowners to get used to the idea of no one showing on their doorstep. No, we can't, she agreed. Imagine if people cut down on their charitable donations budget. And they both shuddered at the thought. So, it was settled. The day of the convention, Bhuka came back, not just with the usual wheat, but this time with some rice, milk, and sugar. Getting the ingredients had been easy, but Bhuki had a little bit more trouble cooking the kheer without alerting her daughters. But she managed it. There was only a tiny bowlful of it. But they were both optimistic. Even that small quantity would be enough to keep them energized for several years, by which time maybe there'd be another beggars' convention. So they pulled out their spoons and were ready to take their bite of this deliciously sweet-smelling kheer. Is that kheer? Pehli asked, as she was standing next to them, rubbing her eyes. They shushed her and told her to go back to sleep. But she wouldn't. So they gave her a spoonful to taste as a bribe, in exchange for her promising to go back to bed right then. She kept her side of the bargain and went back to sleep. Bhuka and Bhuki breathed a sigh of relief when they heard Pehli's distinctive snore. That was a close call, they thought. But they'd better finish the kheer before any of the other girls woke up. Is that kheer? Dusri asked. She had woken up too. Again, they gave her a spoonful and sent her off. Well, this is a folktale, and you can imagine that if it happens to the first and second child, it happens to the rest of them too. Within minutes, all 7 girls were sleeping soundly, with satisfaction, now that they had eaten dessert. And Bhuka and Bhuki were left staring at the tiny bowl that had been scraped completely clean. The two of them didn't even get to taste the kheer. "That's the last straw," said Bhuka, frustrated. "Where?" asked Bhuki, suddenly excited. She was so hungry she would have actually eaten straw. But Bhuka clarified that he was speaking figuratively, much to her disappointment. He sympathized and said that at that moment he wouldn't mind some straw himself. Bhuki looked dejected. "But what can we do when we have those 7 mouths to feed? We must accept our situation and eat humble pie." At that, Bhuka's eyes lit up, until Bhuki clarified that they didn't really have any pie, humble or not. That was just an expression, and call it payback for tempting her with straw. She thought for a while and said that there was one thing they could do, sort of like Hansel and Gretel's parents. In that fairy tale, the parents gave their kids a crash course in independence and survival by abandoning their children in the middle of a forest. Bhuka said that he wasn't surprised that he hadn't heard of it before, because that story hadn't been written yet and wouldn't be for a couple more centuries. But he agreed with the plan. The next day, he took his daughters to the middle of the forest, where he had heard rumors about a tree full of mangoes. When he reached there, he saw that the rumors were true. There was indeed a tree full of mangoes, to his surprise. He was very, very tempted to eat some mangoes, or at least to take them back home to Bhuki. But he was on a mission, and any distractions might cause delays, and that might allow his daughters to follow him home. He made an excuse that he needed to rinse his mouth before eating. He said he thought he had seen a stream nearby, and that he'd be right back. But he wasn't. Evening came on, and darkness began to fall, but still no sign of Bhuka. The girls weren't yet worried though. But a few minutes later, when they had finished every last mango, that was when they began to worry. There weren't any more fruit trees around. What were they going to do for their midnight snack? And if they somehow managed to overcome that, what about breakfast? And second breakfast? They were debating between sleeping on the ground and on the tree. But just then, Dusri excitedly pointed at something in the distance. There was a faint light. Panchvi said that it could be just a firefly, to which Tisri asked if fireflies were tasty. But Pehli thought it was worth a shot. Couldn't be any worse than here, she reasoned. So the girls made their way towards the light. The fact that the light didn't move and didn't flicker as they got closer disproved the firefly hypothesis. When they got closer, they saw that it was a home. They knocked, but no one answered. Pehli looked under the doormat and found a key. Satvi protested that maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But Pehli shook her head patiently and explained why her youngest sister was wrong. "Two reasons," she said. "One, there is a welcome mat here at the door. If that's not an obvious invitation, I don't know what is. Second, if you're worried about us being arrested for breaking and entering, observe that we are not breaking anything. We are simply entering." Everything looked perfect inside. This was clearly the home of 7 individuals. But they were not dwarves, like in Snow White's story. And there wasn't a size hierarchy, like in the case of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. All the furniture was the same size. There were 7 very large chairs, 7 very large beds. There were 7 different kitchens. And at the table, 7 very large bowls with very large spoons. All the bowls were filled with kheer. The girls didn't hesitate. It had been a whole hour since they had finished their last mango. So they seated themselves and ate all the kheer. Each girl went into one of the kitchens and helped themselves to more, until each had finished the whole pot. No one worried at this point why there were 7 kitchens. But they did realize that the kheers had been cooked independently, probably by each of the residents. They considered sleeping in the 7 beds, but ultimately decided that it might be better to sleep out in the loft in the barn. The homeowners might return and be surprised. And they might do something quite unsafe. So the loft in the barn was a better idea. They did notice that the barn had 7 buffaloes. No doubt these were the ones that the milk had come from. The girls went to bed in the loft. In the morning, as they woke up, they saw something very strange. There were 7 men in bear costumes milking the buffaloes. That made the scene odd enough that the girls resisted the urge to jump down from the loft, apologize for the intrusion, and ask for directions home. "Why are they wearing bear costumes?" Chauthi whispered. "It's not Halloween," Dusri replied. "Fancy dress party maybe?" Pehli shushed them both. She said that they weren't in costume. These were actual bears. Their hearts skipped a beat as the other girls realized that Pehli was right. The size should have been an indicator. These bears were at least 12 feet tall. Bit hard to achieve that if you're just a regular-sized person in a costume. That explained the very large furniture too. It was still awkward that the doors were all normal, human-sized. Maybe the contractor who had built the home had trouble getting bear-sized doors. Anyway, that has no bearing on the story. Right now, they needed to observe. And funnily, this was made easy by the realization that they somehow seemed to understand the bears.
"It's very strange how all our kheer disappeared, and how the door was left unlocked,"
one of the bears said. The littlest bear, who was still a giant by human standard, said that it wasn't strange at all. Someone walked in, ate the kheer and left. They should learn from this and stop leaving the key under the welcome mat. But he was dismissed by the others. The largest, oldest bear of the lot stroked his beard and said that it couldn't be anything like that. Personally, he was convinced that there was an alien that had teleported into their home and teleported out. The others agreed.
Teleport? Seriously?
The youngest bear asked.
Then how do you explain the key? We left it under the doormat, and when we returned, it was on the table, and the door was unlocked. How did that happen? Why did aliens with teleports need to do that? It's easy, replied the wise old bear. Telekinesis. The aliens used their mental powers. They made the key sail through the solid welcome mat and the solid front door and land here on the table. And they unlocked the door with those mental powers too.
The littlest bear shrugged and gave up. The bears all went back into the house after they had finished collecting the milk. They cooked it and made kheer. The girls could smell it all the way in the loft. That evening, the bears went out again. The girls went into the bear's home again and ate up all the kheer again. And they went back to sleep in the loft. You'd think, having seen the sharp teeth and claws on the homeowners, the girls might have chosen a different camping spot for that night. But the kheer really was delicious, and every girl really wanted to try out every bear's kheer, since they were all different in taste. A few days passed, and the same thing continued to happen every day and every night. The bears began to get increasingly worried. Then, one day, the wise bear apologized to the youngest one.
You're right. It can't be aliens.
Finally, thought the youngest bear. They were starting to talk some sense.
Right. So we stop leaving the keys under the welcome mat, yeah?
He asked. The wise bear shook his head.
It won't help. These are ghosts.
The littlest bear face-palmed. The wise bear didn't seem to notice and continued his explanation.
They did some things that would be highly odd for an alien to do. They've been using our bathroom. Aliens, with their own physiology, cannot know how to effectively use an anthropomorphic bathroom. But there were signs. The shampoo and conditioner levels have been dipping a lot faster than if we were the only ones using them. And then, yesterday, when we returned home, we had hot water before we had even switched on the water heater.
The littlest bear wanted to suggest that some human person was using their home, and this was the proof. But as usual, no one listened to him.
No, this is the work of ghosts,
the wise bear reiterated.
I'm sure of it. And I've seen enough movies to know that the ghosts will not give up this place. We have to leave it.
That wasn't such a bad thing. The littlest bear made a silent resolution to use this opportunity to get himself smarter roommates. He wanted to pack, but the others stopped him. Ghosts can possess things, and they had to leave without taking anything at all.
Not even the clothes on our back, the wise bear said.
One of the other bears, who was a bit pedantic, pointed out that they had no clothes on their backs. It was a little disappointing to all of them that they couldn't take their buffaloes with them. But it didn't matter. What was the use of having buffaloes if you never got to taste any dish you made using buffalo milk? So they moved out right then and there. The girls were happy, of course, and they moved right into the bear's lifestyle. They already had the kheer eating part down perfectly. Any thoughts of finding their lost parents were forgotten. Meanwhile, their parents thought nothing other than how to find their lost children again. They very much regretted abandoning their children. And they decided, good or bad, they would all stick together. So they spent most days searching the forest for any sign of the girls. It was a very well planned operation. Maybe years of working in a grid based set of streets had guided Bhuka's thoughts as he systematically worked through every area of the forest. And maybe that was what slowed him down. If he had started from the mango tree, instead of going left to right, top to bottom on the forest map, he'd have found them a few months earlier. But he did eventually find the bear's home, which was now his daughter's home. Instead of moving in to this comfy, cozy home, they all moved back to the village. They did take the buffaloes with them. With the daily supply of milk and their daughter's new cooking skills, Bhuka and Bhuki soon opened up a mithai shop, a sweet shop, and they made a huge pile of money. In a strange departure from other traditions in that day and age, getting their daughters married was less of a priority to the parents compared to keeping the mithai business prosperous. That's it for this time. In the next episode, we'll continue on with the war in Lanka as we go back to the Ramayana. If you have any comments or suggestions, or if there are any particular stories you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com, or tweet at sfipodcast, or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.